A quiet night, guards distracted. By morning, $500 million in art was gone. No alarms, no suspects, no answers. And that was only one of the heists that shook the world. For decades, thieves have carried out escapes so bold, so perfect, they've left investigators chasing shadows. Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum Heist. Boston, March 18, 1990. It was just after midnight, when two men dressed as police officers pulled up outside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. They rang the buzzer and told security they were responding to a disturbance. Against protocol, the guards opened the door. Within minutes, the guards were handcuffed, duct-taped, and helpless in the basement. For the next 81 minutes, the thieves strolled through the museum with absolute calm. No rush, no panic. They carefully removed 13 works of art, slicing canvases out of their frames and smashing gilded mounts. Among them, Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, Vermeer's The Concert, and sketches by Degas. In total, the stolen pieces were valued at over $500 million, making it the largest art heist in history. Despite the scale, no one has ever been charged. The FBI has chased theories involving the Italian mob, Boston crime families, and even international smugglers, but the truth remains a mystery. Today, the museum keeps the empty frames hanging in place, a chilling reminder of what vanished that night. Visitors walk past them, staring at ghostly gaps where masterpieces once hung. Like the Gardner heist is more than a robbery. It's a hole in history, a crime that erased beauty from the public forever. And like all great mysteries, the question remains: are those paintings hidden in a private collection, or destroyed, lost forever? The Lufthansa Heist, 1978. December 11th, 1978. New York City. At JFK Airport, a cargo terminal held millions in unmarked bills flown in from overseas. Just before dawn, a crew of armed men slipped past security and stormed the building. They tied up the workers, forced them to the floor, and began unloading bundles of cash and jewelry. In less than an hour, they walked out with nearly $6 million, the equivalent of over $25 million today. It was, at the time, the largest cash robbery in U.S. history. The job was carefully planned by mob associate Jimmy Burke, tied to the Lucchese crime family. His crew had inside information about the shipment, but after the heist, things spiraled. The robbers celebrated too loudly. They bought flashy cars, fur coats, and houses, drawing attention they couldn't afford. Burke, paranoid about being exposed, allegedly ordered the murders of several men involved. Bodies began piling up in New York. Most of the crew never lived to spend their share. Despite the FBI's massive investigation, almost none of the stolen money was ever recovered. The heist later gained legendary status thanks to Martin Scorsese's film Goodfellas, which dramatized the paranoia, betrayal, and mob politics behind it. What makes the Lufthansa heist so unforgettable isn't just the money, it's the aftermath. The very people who pulled off one of the greatest robberies in history became victims of their own greed and fear. A fortune vanished in one night, and almost everyone who touched it paid the ultimate price. But the question lingers: where did all that money go? The Antwerp diamond heist. February 2003, Antwerp, Belgium, the center of the world's diamond trade. Deep in the diamond district sat one of the most secure vaults in Europe, protected by multiple alarms, magnetic sensors, heat detectors, and 24-hour surveillance. Everyone believed it was impenetrable. But Leonardo Notarbartolo and his crew, later called the School of Turin, proved otherwise. They spent over a year preparing, renting an office inside the building to gain access and study every detail of the vault. They secretly built a replica of the vault to practice on, rehearsing until they could bypass every lock and alarm without hesitation. On the night of February 15th, they struck. Security cameras were blinded. Heat and motion detectors were tricked with aluminum foil and clever wiring. Magnetic locks were disabled. They broke through layers of protection with calm precision, moving like they had done it 100 times before. When it was over, the thieves walked away with over $100 million in diamonds, gold, and jewelry. The heist of the century. Police later caught Notarbartolo after DNA evidence tied him to the scene, but by then most of the loot had already disappeared. He claimed he was just the front man, hired by others, and that the diamonds were gone before he even returned home. To this day, The majority of the stolen gems remain missing, fueling endless speculation. Are they sitting in hidden vaults, scattered across the black market, or sparkling quietly in the hands of collectors who know exactly what they're worth? The Antwerp heist wasn't just about money, it was about mastery. A year of planning for a single night's work. A crime that embarrassed a global industry, and a mystery still glittering in the dark. Banco Central Burglary, Brazil, August 2005, Fortaleza, Brazil. Bank employees walked into the Banco Central vault on a Monday morning expecting business as usual. Instead, they found empty shelves. More than 160 million Brazilian reals, about $70 million USD, had vanished. The thieves hadn't blasted their way in, or slipped through the front door. They had dug a 260-foot tunnel, starting from a rented house down the street. The tunnel ran beneath 2 city blocks, reinforced with wood and plastic, and even had lighting and ventilation. It took 3 months of labor, quietly carried out in broad daylight. Neighbors thought the men were running a landscaping business. Trucks came and went with soil, but no one suspected a thing. Once inside the vault, the thieves removed 3 tons of banknotes, mostly small bills, loaded them into trucks, and disappeared without triggering alarms. It was one of the largest bank robberies in world history, and certainly one of the boldest. The Brazilian government launched a massive manhunt. Several suspects were eventually caught, but most of the money was never recovered. Authorities estimated only about 7% of the total haul was ever found. The mastermind behind the heist, Luis Fernando Ribeiro, was later captured but murdered before he could reveal where the money went. His death only deepened the mystery. What made the crime legendary wasn't just the amount stolen, but the sheer discipline and logistics required. A tunnel dug with precision, months of work under the noses of police and locals, and an execution so flawless that investigators were left stunned. The Banco Central burglary wasn't just a robbery. It was an underground operation that proved patience and planning can outmatch even the strongest walls. But the burning question remains. Where is the missing fortune now? Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Heist 2015. Easter weekend. 2015. London's financial district was quiet, the streets nearly empty. While most people were at home enjoying the holiday, a group of elderly men, many in their 60s and 70s, were planning the biggest score of their lives. Their target, the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Company, a vault in the heart of London's jewelry district. Using an elevator shaft, the men climbed down to the basement and drilled through a 20-inch thick concrete wall to reach the vault. It was exhausting, dirty work, but they were patient. Inside, they looted 73 safe deposit boxes, hauling away jewelry, gold, cash, and precious stones worth an estimated £14 million, about $20 million USD. What made headlines wasn't just the haul, it was who pulled it off. These weren't young professionals or high-tech criminals. They were seasoned thieves, old-school burglars, who had spent decades in and out of prison. Some wore hearing aids, others had heart conditions. British tabloids dubbed them the bad grandpas, and the heist was quickly compared to a Hollywood script. But the story didn't end well for the crew. Police had been watching their movements closely, and within weeks, most of the men were arrested. Much of the stolen loot was never recovered, vanishing into the black market. Even behind bars, the heists cemented their reputation. It wasn't just the money, but the image. Elderly men crawling through tunnels, pulling off one last job against all odds. The Hatton Garden heist was proof that age doesn't dull ambition, and in some cases, it only makes the legend bigger. But if they could pull it off, what else might be possible? Even from the unlikeliest suspects. The Great Train Robbery, 1963. August 8, 1963. In the early hours of the morning, a Royal Mail train was making its run from Glasgow to London. On board, millions of pounds in used banknotes, sent to be retired from circulation. At a rural stop in Buckinghamshire, the signal light suddenly turned red. The train braked to a halt. What the driver didn't know was that the light had been tampered with. As the train stopped, 15 masked men swarmed out of the dark. They overpowered the driver and crew, cutting phone lines in the area to prevent communication. The gang detached the engine and the mail car containing the cash, driving it a short distance down the track to unload. In less than half an hour, they carried away over £2.6 million, worth more than $60 million in today's money. It was the biggest robbery Britain had ever seen. The gang retreated to a safe house where they divided the money, but success quickly unraveled. Some of the thieves left behind fingerprints and evidence, and within weeks, police had launched one of the largest manhunts in UK history. 11 of the gang were eventually convicted and given harsh sentences. It's 30 years each, a punishment designed to make an example of them. Others fled abroad, living on the run for years. 1. Ronnie Biggs escaped prison and lived in Brazil for decades before finally returning to the UK. Despite the arrests, most of the money was never recovered, and the crime became part of British folklore. To many, the robbers weren't just criminals. They became anti-establishment folk heroes, seen as ordinary men who had outsmarted the system. But behind the legend was violence. The train driver, Jack Mills, was badly beaten during the raid, and he never fully recovered. The Great Train Robbery blurred the line between crime and myth, celebrated in books, films, and songs. But beneath the glamour lies a harsher truth. Was it really a daring victory against the system, or just another brutal crime that destroyed lives? The Dunbar Armored Robbery, Los Angeles, September 1997. Alan Pace was trusted as a regional safety inspector for Dunbar Armored, the company responsible for transporting millions in cash across California. What his employers didn't know was that he was secretly planning the biggest betrayal in U.S. heist history. Using his insider knowledge, Pace carefully mapped out the Dunbar cash depot, studying the layout, cameras, and security weaknesses. He knew the guard schedules, the blind spots in surveillance, and exactly when the vaults would be fullest. On the night of September 12th, Pace used his security access to sneak 5 accomplices into the depot. They ambushed the guards, tied them up, and within minutes had control of the building. Moving quickly and with precision, the crew loaded $18.9 million in cash, the largest cash haul ever stolen in the United States. Because Pace knew exactly where the big bills were stored, they bypassed smaller bundles, making the getaway even faster. The heist went off flawlessly. For years, the group managed to keep their crime hidden. They laundered the money slowly, buying property, cars, and luxuries under the radar. But their luck eventually ran out. One accomplice carelessly handed a stack of marked bills to a real estate broker, who recognized the link to the Dunbar case. From there, investigators closed in. Alan Pace, once a trusted employee, was arrested and sentenced to 24 years in prison. Some of his crew members also faced justice, but a large portion of the money was never recovered. The Dunbar robbery stands as the ultimate inside job, proof that the greatest threat to a fortress can come from within. The Dunbar crew almost pulled off the perfect crime, but as history shows, even the most carefully laid plans are one careless move away from collapse. The Stockholm helicopter heist, early morning, September 23, 2009, Stockholm, Sweden. Residents awoke to the sound of a helicopter flying low across the city. But this wasn't a routine flight. It was the beginning of one of the most daring robberies Europe had ever seen. The target was a cash depot in the suburb of Uxberga, a facility holding millions of Swedish kronor. Security was tight, but the robbers had planned every detail. Armed men leaped out, smashing skylights to drop directly inside the building. They set off explosives to blast through reinforced doors, all while carrying automatic weapons to intimidate staff. The entire operation was fast, brutal, and incredibly precise. Police scrambled to respond, but they quickly realized they couldn't deploy their own helicopters. Why? The gang had planted fake bombs at the police hangar, forcing law enforcement to stay grounded. For nearly 20 minutes, the robbers loaded bags of cash into the waiting helicopter before taking off into the dark skies. By the time authorities secured the scene, the thieves were long gone. The stolen haul was estimated at millions of dollars, though the exact figure was never confirmed publicly. In the aftermath, Swedish police captured some suspects, including the helicopter pilot, but much of the money was never recovered. The sheer audacity of the plan, using a helicopter, explosives, and decoys, stunned investigators worldwide. The robbery was so bold it immediately drew comparisons to Hollywood thrillers. But this wasn't fiction. It was a crime carried out with military precision, leaving a permanent mark on Sweden's criminal history. The Stockholm helicopter heist blurred the line between reality and film, and proved that sometimes the most outrageous plots aren't found in movies. But in the morning news, the United California Bank Heist. March 1972, Laguna Niguel, California. A small group of professional burglars, led by Emil Dincio, set their sights on the United California Bank. Using insider tips and weeks of planning, the crew cut power to the building, disabled alarms, and broke into the vault with dynamite. What they found inside was staggering. Over $30 million in cash, valuables, and stocks, making it the largest bank burglary in U.S. history at the time. The heist shocked the financial world, and despite the arrests that followed, most of the stolen money was never recovered. Dincio and several of his crew were eventually caught after pulling off a nearly identical burglary in Ohio, but the majority of the fortune remains missing to this day. What makes the United California Bank heist legendary is how methodical it was. Burglars operated like a small military unit, disciplined, precise, and fearless. Even after half a century, much of their loot remains unaccounted for. The money trail went cold decades ago, leaving a mystery that still gnaws at investigators. Where did all that cash go, and who might still be holding the spoils? The Brinksmat Robbery, November 26, 1983. Heathrow International Trading Estate, London. 6 armed men stormed a warehouse operated by Brinksmat, expecting to find a few million in cash. What they discovered instead was far greater. Pallets stacked with 3 tons of gold bullion, worth over £26 million at the time, more than £100 million today. The men tied up the guards and threatened them to cooperate. Within minutes, the thieves had loaded the gold, diamonds, and cash into waiting vehicles. This wasn't just a robbery. It was the beginning of what British media would call the crime of the century. But the challenge wasn't stealing the gold, it was laundering it. Melting down and reselling bullion of that scale required criminal networks across Europe. The robbery dragged organized crime deep into gold smuggling, property fraud, and drug trafficking. Several of the robbers were eventually caught, but much of the gold was never recovered. Investigators believe it was melted down, mixed with legitimate stocks, and reintroduced into markets worldwide. Some even claim that jewelry purchased in the UK today may still contain traces of the stolen Brinksmat gold. The case also left a bloody trail. Over the years, dozens of people connected to the robbery, from launderers to handlers, were murdered, fueling rumors of betrayals and double crosses. The Brinksmat heist didn't just make headlines, it altered the landscape of organized crime in Britain, tying together gangs, corrupt businessmen, and international networks. What began as a smash and grab turned into a legacy of blood, greed, and mystery, and the question still hangs in the air. How much of that stolen gold is still out there, hiding in plain sight? The Pierre Hotel Heist, January 2nd, 1972. New Year's weekend in New York City. While guests at the luxurious Pierre Hotel slept in their penthouse suites, 2 men dressed in tuxedos walked into the lobby carrying pistols. They looked like they belonged there. But they were about to stage one of the greatest hotel robberies of all time. The men were members of the Lucchese crime family, working with mafia connections and skilled safecrackers. Just after 3 a.m., they overpowered hotel staff and herded employees and guards into a secure room. Not a single guest was harmed. The robbers knew that violence would draw too much attention. For the next 2 hours, the thieves systematically looted the hotel's safety deposit boxes. Inside were the treasures of the wealthy elite: jewels, cash, bonds, and priceless heirlooms. By the time the crew was done, they had walked away with an estimated $27 million in valuables, equivalent to nearly $180 million today. Despite the size of the score, very little of the loot was ever recovered. Some insiders suspected corrupt law enforcement or organized crime figures pocketed much of it during the investigation. Over time, a few members of the gang were arrested, but the majority of the treasure disappeared into the black market. For the wealthy victims, the losses were devastating. The underworld, the Pier, became legend. What makes the Pier heist unforgettable is not just its scale, but its setting. A glittering hotel filled with the rich and powerful, robbed under their noses by men who knew exactly how to blend in with the world they were stealing from. The Pierre heist was as much about style as it was about substance. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous criminals look like gentlemen in tuxedos. But where those millions ended up, that remains a mystery. The Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Heist, July 12, 1987, London. A quiet Sunday afternoon at the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center, a high-security facility where wealthy clients stored their cash, jewels, and documents. Among the visitors that day was Valerio Vice, an Italian career criminal already wanted for dozens of robberies in his home country. He walked in, dressed sharply, requesting to rent a safe deposit box. The staff, unaware of who he really was, let him in. Once inside, Vice pulled out a gun. His accomplices quickly followed, subduing the guards and staff. Within minutes, the entire facility was under their control. The robbers hung a closed sign on the front door to avoid suspicion and began their work. They broke into dozens of safe deposit boxes, hauling out valuables estimated at more than £60 million, one of the largest heists in British history. The sheer audacity stunned investigators. Vice hadn't slipped in under cover of night. He had walked through the front door in broad daylight and calmly taken over the bank. But Vice's arrogance was his downfall. After fleeing abroad, he couldn't resist returning to London to collect his Ferrari. That mistake led police straight to him. He was captured and sentenced to 22 years in prison. Still, most of the stolen fortune was never recovered. The loot was believed to have been smuggled overseas and laundered through criminal networks, vanishing into thin air. Vice himself remained flamboyant, even in prison, known for writing letters, giving interviews, and reveling in the fame of his crime. To him, the heist wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. The Knightsbridge heist was the perfect ending to an era of high-stakes robberies, bold, dangerous, and unforgettable. But like the others, it left behind a question that still echoes. Where did the fortune go? And how many men got rich off one afternoon's work? From art that vanished without a trace, 2 tunnels dug beneath city streets. 2 vaults cracked open in broad daylight. Each of these heists shares one truth. The loot is gone, and the mystery remains. Billions in cash, gold, and jewels stolen across decades. Yet only fragments ever recovered. Somewhere hidden in vaults, melted into markets, or locked away in private collections, the spoils of these robberies may still exist. But here's the chilling thought. If these crimes could be carried out so perfectly, what other treasures might be disappearing right now, in silence, while no one is watching?